computer. Hello, Tyler Pygott, for the fans out there. PGO.
How's it going?
How you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. I like that if I could add some glasses right now, grow a little bit more thickness here, and we got some twinning going on.
We're close. Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yep.
Well, today we have a fun topic we're going to talk about, and most people are probably used to seeing Amanda's face, and they're probably disappointed that they're seeing my face now. Like, who is this guy? But we have the pleasure of working together. My name is Frank. I'm a brand strategist at LoanFur, and Amanda needed a little mental break. Just kidding. We had talked about this conversation that we're going to talk about today for quite a while, honestly. I mean, I've had conversations like this when it comes to, building a brand and from your perspective, really overseeing an entire business in a pretty heavy growth stage. And so today's conversation is around the idea of capital constraint versus creativity. And we're going to talk about what that means. We're going to talk about your thoughts on it, because as much as you may not think you're an expert, this is definitely an area that I think you have a lot of wisdom, discernment, advice, insight on that I think a lot of people would value. So you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So how did this start? A few months back, I came across this quote by Webb Smith, and we've talked about him a lot. Shout out to Webb Smith and the 2PM brand. And he had this quote, I think it was on Twitter, where he said, "Capital constraint can influence extraordinary brand and operational creativity." And I remember we talked about that, and we've had an ongoing conversation related that to a while. But can you share a little bit more on what are we talking about when looking at the balance or dynamic between this idea of capital constraint and creativity? What does that mean even?
Yeah. First of all, I love this quote. I think I have it written on my whiteboard on this side of my office, and I have it written on there, and I literally probably read it like daily at this point. And really what it's talking about, and there's probably different versions or interpretations of it, right? But capital usually means money and some sort of resources, right? And so it's talking about your constraints of money and how that can influence like a lot of creativity around how you're building a brand or how you're operating a company. In this case, and we're taking it as for a company, you could, any sort of organization, any sort of team, you can probably take it with that in mind as well. But so the filter that I'm seeing it through is, as we've built a company, we've bootstrapped our company. So we haven't taken outside investment. We haven't taken outside, family money. Tyler didn't come in as an independently wealthy individual that had millions of dollars to throw at this business opportunity. And so what that means is you grow as you can, and your money that you make, your profit you make, your margins you make become kind of your throttle to how fast you can grow. But there are also opportunities to be super creative with how you use that money, or how you use that capital, or how you use your resources, and then what the output of that looks like within your company. So that's kind of, I guess, my long-winded, what happens in my mind when I read that quote.
Yeah. And I think that's great. Even like you said, I think that's where probably some of the experiences, come from. We'll probably talk about some of those later too. But yeah, that idea of like, not everyone, no matter what size business you are, you're going to have limited capital or limited resources. No matter, you could be Apple and Nike, and they still have finite resources. So I think that's a really cool way of putting it. Yeah. So that statement then, capital constraint can influence extraordinary brand and operational creativity. And when we apply that to business, what does brand and operational creativity look like when resources are reduced or not available? What are like the tangible visuals or scenarios that might happen if that's the case for a business, really any business?
Yeah. So, I think what I look at a little bit when you talk about like brand and operational creativity and what that can look like if you have some sort of a filter you have to see that through, and oftentimes that's capital constraints. I honestly look at priorities. And so, what are you trying to do and what are your priorities? And because that tells you how you're going to spend that money, or how you're going to put that, additional resource, that time into it and whatnot, like what it's going to look like, because you can't do all of it, and you can't really afford to do things that aren't going to have some sort of a tangible result. And in business, that always happens, right? There's always things that you put effort towards and you're like, shoot, that didn't work. But then there's oftentimes as well, there's things that you put energy and effort into that do work. And so that's really then what you focus on when you don't have endless bank accounts or endless supply to be able to put towards things. You just constantly have to measure. You're measuring it really tight. You're not really giving it a huge window, or you're oftentimes not able to kind of go, oh, well, it didn't work the last 3 months, but maybe the next 3 months it might. You're constantly having to look at it and evolve it and change it and kind of tweak it here and there to see how can you make that more effective or stretch that dollar a little bit further.
Yeah.
So it's about priorities a little bit. It's also about what you're trying to achieve. And so then when you're looking through those specific filters, say for instance, you're really trying to drive revenue or impact your revenue numbers. When you're capitally constrained, you're not able to just go hire that massive sales team. You have to be super creative with how you're doing things. And so you're really looking at, okay, what's the best bang for my buck, if you will, for how you're using the capital you have or the time you have. Because I look at capital a little bit as resources, so it is time, it's energy, it's money as well. It's not just money. It's all the above, because it's all of us, And so it really just doesn't allow you to get comfortable, because you have to kind of remain a little bit uncomfortable so that you're constantly looking at the things that matter. I remember this quote. I don't even know. It's not really a quote. It was kind of a dialogue or a narrative when the pandemic happened. And there are a couple people that said it. And really what it came down to was, hey, you need to like get in charge of your expenses, or whatever you want to call it. You need to know where your money's going. And so probably the best way to do that is to cancel or cut up your credit card. And then you'll find out the different things that were recurring or the different payments you're making. And then you can get a new credit card or a new debit card or whatever. And then you can start those services back up again. And I just remember kind of like cringing, going, wait a second, you're buying, as a business, you're having things hit your credit card that you don't know about. Like, that's crazy to me. And maybe it's because I'm a small business and big business doesn't have to care. But again, if you're capitally constrained, you have to know where every dime and every penny is going. So that if we could reduce this over here, could we put that over here? Because that's what's really getting, results or helping us kind of push things forward. So it really is just like you set up different dashboards and different reports and scorecards and all sorts of different things that track things that matter based on what you're trying to achieve. And you're just hyper focused, hyper in tune with it. You're really trying to, like, in some ways you think about, if from a personal standpoint, if you are maybe you're between jobs, or you're just out of college, or one of those life scenarios where you're like, I don't have a lot of money right now. And so usually that means you've got to live on some sort of a budget. You can't just spend because there won't be anything left. Yeah. And so a lot of what that means, though, then when you're capitally constrained as a business, is you go, well, we have to live off of the amount that we make, and we have to stretch it as far as we can. So we do have to live off of a budget. So you can't just buy that software you need, or hire that person you need, or sure, let's just, work on that internal project forever, because who cares? And you actually do have to pay a lot of attention to those types of things. So I don't know if that brings color to it or commentary to it, but there's a little detail into it.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on, I think, multiple layers of it from how I'm hearing it is, that keyword it can influence extraordinary brand and operational creativity. And you also hit on the creativity part and the operational part. So all three, I think the Ken element from what you're saying is, if your mindset is correct, or you're open to your mindset being correct, if you don't have this expectation that you can just throw cash or, time or people at a project just to make it better, you have to develop the mindset that, like, even if you have some of the capital, that shouldn't be your first, like, that shouldn't be your default, like, hey, let's just throw money at it. Let's just, prove the idea first. But then also the operational and creativity side, operationally looking at those things closely, not wasting resources, not being loose with whatever resources you do have, stewarding them really well and tightly. But also on the creativity spectrum of it is pushing yourself to do that first part, to push for an idea that may be outside of the box, or something that may not take as much creativity, like you said before, or as much capital, like an MVP version, or thinking outside the box of, hey, we can make this work, or at least test this concept, test this idea before we then throw money at it, or throw time or resources, more people, whatever it is. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it just forces you to be scrappy a little bit, and it
Yeah.
forces you just to think that way. It forces you to hustle a little bit more.
Yeah.
None of the things I think that are bad. I mean, I said a little bit earlier, like it forces you to stay a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And the minute you get comfortable, normally that means you get a little bit lazy. I mean, and I don't mean that as a critical to any brand or a person or anything. It's just,
Yeah.
that's usually what happens. I've had those seasons in my life where you're like, oh, everything's fine, the coffers are full, like I've got everything we need. And so then you really do kind of just take your foot off the gas a little bit, and you kind of chill out. And there's nothing wrong with those. And I think a balanced business over time has those types of seasons, and you can't constantly just live under pressure. But some seasons do like require more creativity based on like maybe what you're trying to accomplish or something. And so that scrappiness usually means, and that hustle usually means you're going to achieve something at probably a faster rate with less capital than maybe the person next to you that's just getting the opportunity to write larger checks.
Yeah.
And that's, again, there's not a bad or a good way to do this necessarily. There's 300 ways to accomplish, most business objectives. There's not just one. And I know I have lots to learn from it. I'm not this, crazy expert in this, but I am pretty creative with money and pretty creative with capital and stretching it really as far as it can go.
Yeah.
And I would also say I'm also pretty optimistic. And so big goals, going to get big things, but at the same standpoint, how do you get there as efficiently as you can? So
yeah, I like that a lot. I do want to talk about some of your experiences tangibly about like, how you've done that. One example I have for anyone listening is like, even here in Nashville, I think it was a couple months ago, maybe I've lost track of time at this point, but maybe a couple months ago, Casey Musgraves was really funny, released an album, but weeks beforehand. And we just talked about running a couple minutes ago personally, but I was running around the area here in Nashville, and I saw the spray painted star-crossed everywhere all over these sidewalks. And I'm like, spray painted in red, this word star-crossed. I was like, what is that? I'm basically tripping over it every 10 feet. What is this? And I had no idea. I think I Googled it at the time maybe, and I couldn't even remember. It's like, what is this? It's so random. I don't even know what it is. And like a couple days later, maybe it was like a week or two later, Casey Musgraves releases this album called Star-Crossed. And, she's here in Nashville or whatever like that. But I just a long story short is like, even someone who probably has a good amount of resources at this point after having some success previous to that, maybe some teams that could, do some marketing campaigns and all this, like spray paint maybe cost a couple of bucks in someone's time. And really the creativity element of it is like, we're just going to go raise a bunch of awareness for this album by piquing curiosity. And I just thought that was a great example of something like that. Probably has the capital or the resources to do something maybe a little bit more, a little bit more industry standard, whatever it might be. And for like whoever it was, it's like, no, let's just go spray paint half the town. I don't know if it was legal or not, but either way, very creative.
Not endorsing the behavior, but yeah.
No, totally. But yeah, tell us, as we kind of near the end here, tell us a little bit about how you've personally experience the relationship between the two, as a business owner, maybe even in right now that's definitely something that's probably more close to the sleeve for you as a business owner and an operator, but I know probably in other positions as well previous to that. Has there been any experience where you're like that, yeah, this is how I've really experienced the dynamic or relationship between these two over my career?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of it probably traces back to like MVP, like a minimum viable product versus like a fully built out XYZ, whatever it is. And I think a lot of it traces back to that. I think of previous jobs I've had in my career with consumer packaged products, or even in this job where you're building out internal assets or internal development modules or catalogs or libraries or whatever the thing is that you're doing. You can push it all the way down the road and make sure it's like fully in the end zone, and then you run with it, knowing you're probably going to have to come back and revise it a million times, or you can get it to the 20-yard line and go, well, how's this going to work? Is this going to play? How are people going to, and then you're adjusting that feedback as things go along. I mean, I think for me as an entrepreneur, I would say, I've done this over and over and over and over again with, back to consumer packaged products. And it was like, I remember flying all over the country trying to find, a co-packer after we bottled it and packaged it internally by printing stickers and staying up late and adding those to their product. And then you're selling that product and you're kind of hustling it out there and getting feedback on it. And then you build out a name and a brand. And then now you look for that co-packer once you've kind of proven that the market actually wants to pay for your product, and they're paying for it actively, and you're using that money and investing that back into the brand. And I just know that if we would have, I look back on that and I go, if I would have spent, a month flying around the country, meeting with different people about, heat shrinking and certain packaging requirements and cold chain and all the different things that we needed for our consumer package, if I would have done that at the beginning, I would have missed so many things, because you learn so much when you're doing, like that minimum viable product to try to get it out in front of people and see if they're interested in that type of thing. And so I think that like just having that mindset where you do have those capital constraints oftentimes just forces you to be creative. It forces you to, hey, I still want to achieve this, and I still think it's possible to achieve this, whatever the this is, but you've got to figure out a way to get there, that you can't just, spend the money or write the checks or hire the people or, these crazy teams. I think it's honestly, I feel like it's a great reminder to salespeople, because you've got to be creative in this day and age when you're selling something, especially if you're selling B2B and you're selling, B2C as well, but like, it's just a different buying system and environment and atmosphere that's out there now than it was even 6 months ago, 12 months ago, 18 months ago, 2 years ago. It's changing fast. And so if you're not creative with how you're selling things, you're probably losing a little bit. Unless you've got a product that's already been developed and you're way further down the road. But if you're anywhere in the startup to, just getting going, you're definitely, having to be creative with that kind of thing. And so like just knowing that like you have to hit your goals still, and you've still got your eye down the road and on that kind of end goal, but you've got to figure out a way to be creative for that. So I would say a couple of things operationally that I've done just for quick, parting shots. Like I call it my 14-day list. And so I learned this personally of like buying things and, from out of college till now, but like, if I want something, I put it on a list and I let it sit there for 14 days before I buy it. Is that like the law? No, because some things are different. But if it's something that's not like a need or requirement or mission critical thing, I just go, man, this would be a nice to have. It sits on a list for at least 2 weeks. And then I revisit it to see if we're going to, hey, is this worth purchasing? Because oftentimes you've figured it out in that amount of time and something else has taken its place, or, the priorities change or whatnot. And so instead of just like pulling the trigger on things and just purchasing, or, whatever that is, signing up for new services or hiring people that fast, getting to the spot where you're like, hey, having it sit somewhere for a little bit so that it kind of just marinates on that list a little bit. And then you decide, hey, is this still a need? Has been super helpful, I think, for us, because it makes it so that you're not just, oh, wait, I already spent the money. Well, this actually fits better. Well, then hopefully you can get out of that. And then it just causes a lot of drama. And so that's been really helpful. And then I think super active around your knowing where all your money goes, knowing where every dime goes, measuring it weekly, if not more regularly than that. You've obviously got to, take it with a grain of salt, because it takes money to make money, right? We all know that. It takes money to put into business and impact top line and many of those types of things. But you also know where everything's going. And so you can kind of have a really good beat of it. And there's not too many surprises, which is super important as well. So those are kind of some two different things. Living on a budget is helpful personally, as well as it's helpful living and operating on a budget within a company. And knowing, like, again, it's back to where all the money goes, but it's like, no, but what's happening when, and you can like kind of start to rely on that a little bit more. And that's been super helpful too. So
yeah, no, I love that kind of forced into creativity. And usually, like you just said, usually by that time you may have figured something out, especially in business, maybe not necessarily personally, but maybe in business more so. And going back to that later on and saying like, oh, I could have probably figured out something else or whatever it was, can lead you to probably, because there's usually, like you said earlier in the conversation, there might be 300 ways to get somewhere. Usually I think our first, including myself, is usually like the most obvious thing, but that's usually probably not the most creative thing. I think having that gap, even if you know that you can do it, leaves you the time to do that. So last thing before we wrap up, to pick your brain.
Yeah.
All conversation is about, or up to this point has really been about like, hey, how do you either create the mindset that can leverage operational and brain creativity, or even if you're forced into the scenario of, hey, we just don't have the resources and capital we need to drive things forward. So up to this point, it's been, how do you function within that space? But now at some point, like you just said, it takes money to make money, right? At some point, you do want to put cash into things. You do want to put resources into things to really to really explore the ceiling and potential of those things. When would you say now is the right time to be like, yeah, I want to start pouring some cash into this and see what we can do with it?
Yeah, that's a great question because it depends. I've kind of always been under the mindset of figuring things out to the spot where you could invite somebody into it to help them either build on it or run it for you. And so that can be anywhere from, hey, you can do your own accounting, you can do your own bookkeeping. Like, it's not that big a deal. You can learn it. You can literally watch YouTube videos at this point and learn it, read books and learn it, ask questions of smarter people than you and learn it. And I did that for the first number of years because I was like, well, I don't really want to pay someone for this yet. And so, but then I got the accounting system, bookkeeping system, tax paying, all the stuff, all of the processes created at a smaller kind of manageable standpoint that I could do. And then it got to the spot where I could invite somebody in to help improve it and invest in it and make it better. And then I wasn't necessarily the one that was 100% responsible for it anymore. And so I would say that that's happened over and over and over again in this business where, you're building out the design team, or you're building out the content team, or the client management team, or the operations team, or the sales team, and really kind of going there first and learning it and trying to do your best to figuring it out, to a certain standpoint. And then you've got like somebody to hire into. That doesn't always work, but that's been the philosophy kind of that we've operated under as a business. When you get a little bit bigger, kind of like 15 plus people, you generally can't quite do that as well. And so you've got people in lots of different seats, and then you can start to kind of invest in bringing additional people in as you're trying to grow things, because that's really what you're taking your risk on, right? You're taking your risk on that team or that process or that product you're launching or service you're launching. And so you can have people that you'd hire into that. But still the principle is the same, where that's oftentimes what we do now, where it's like, you and I have worked on different workshops and strategy sessions and different things that we built out as products, and we've tested them and tried them. And I've done some of them, you've done some of them. And now we've kind of started to scale that effort a little bit more because we've figured out what that looks like. But we've been in the trenches trying to figure it out until we were at the spot where, okay, I think we're ready for this. So that's kind of again, it's a mindset, but then you're mixing that now with being able to kind of go, hey, when's the right time to really dump fuel on that fire? Which is hard to know exactly when. There's lots of different ways and philosophies for it. I would just say a lot of it comes down to, are you seeing results in what you're looking for? And then if you are, and you've built a system to invite somebody into, that would make a great sense to being able to hire someone to kind of be in that spot. Most of our business is people, right? Our product is as good as our people. We're an agency. We provide services, professional services, those types of things. And so most of my experience in the last kind of 7-8 years has been about people, versus previously it was like, well, should we buy this massive, heat shrink machine to wrap, water bottles or whatever? And that was a couple $1 million. And that's a different capital expense, and you can be creative with those types of things. But most of it at this point has been people and then processes. So I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of been a way to start looking at it, is go get your hands dirty first and figure it out. And then once you've got something where you feel like, hey, this is working, do your own legwork. And then once it's working, you can kind of invite somebody into it and you can invest in that. Maybe it's a tool, maybe it's a person, but that's kind of the process.
Yeah, I think that's great. So like sum up, at least what I'm hearing is most of the time, you don't want to throw money at something in large amounts to solve the problem or even hope it solves the problem. You usually want to try and find a viable solution first, and then use cash, resources, whatever, to scale that solution.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean,
I would agree. I think
it's cash. It could be, in some cases, it's investment. I mean, think of any software company that you probably know that's big at this point started in somebody's garage or someone's back office or basement or whatever. And they were really like churned until they got to the spot where they had some sort of a product and people were starting to pay them and it had some results. And then they were able to hire people in going, oh, I think we need a salesperson. Oh, I think we need this backend developer. Oh, I think we need this operational, whatever, CFO or whatever that is. But they did all the legwork, initially to build that first kind of MVP and get it into the environment where you could start getting feedback. And then you start, reiterating on that. And it's really the same thing if you think about services. If you really think about any business and venture, it's really the same thing. Got to figure out what's going to sell. And you got to figure out what people need and how you're going to deliver that. And then once you've figured a lot of that out, you can then start to kind of really build that out and pour some resources into it. So.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I think it's important for people to know, like, that's really how we function. That's how, I mean, for anyone listening, I'm a perfectionist, need to figure it out before it ever works. And years ago when I started, working for you, asking questions like, hey, we should just go get this product. Well, asking questions on like, why not no, but like, why, what's the solution? What is it going to do? And I was like, never been forced to think that way about something prior to that point. Cause usually some of the businesses I had been a part of in the past and some of the way it's done is like, hey, just go buy this product as long as it works, like figure it out. But I like that mindset. And that's how, I mean, even as we've grown from a team of, 4 or 5 people up to some 20, maybe now, I don't know, somewhere around there and possibly growing more, is like the mindset has remained pretty much the same. Obviously it's different. You do have to bring people in that just know things you don't, or like, I don't know about web development. So I'd hope that we hire someone that can figure that out more efficiently. But I think that's great. Well, thank you for all of your thoughts and time. Appreciate talking about this stuff, and I'm sure we'll continue to talk about it.
Heck yeah. Thanks for the time. See you soon.
Appreciate it, Tyler.